Hello there, and welcome back to the show. Infinite Inning number 378. I am your congenial, your convivial, and possibly even your congenital host, Stephen Goldman. I hope you are well. I have been, lo these many years, promising a mini episode and then going on to speak for 45 minutes or an hour anyway. I feel reasonably confident that this week we will finally achieve or live down to that mini episode idea because I have not prepared that much. I have some things I want to say to you, but I do not have a full-blown story. The reason why, I alluded to it last week, I require a minor surgery. Now, the wisest among you may be saying, Steve, there are no minor surgeries. There are only minor surgeons. And I think that is very well taken, that point. It is not minor to me. I am dreading it. It is minor in the sense that, under most conditions, it should not be life-threatening. It is not one of those situations either fraught with the potential for a mistake, like when you might need some procedure done on your left arm, and someone gets the instructions screwed up and ends up amputating your right arm. Actually, when I had eye cancer, ocular melanoma, and I was going to have my right eye pretty well destroyed, we all of us, including me, made sure that no one was confused about that. Which eye are we working on? I was asked repeatedly, and I would say, right eye, right eye, right eye. And then at the end of sort of this gauntlet of people asking me that question, someone took a Sharpie and drew on my forehead a great big arrow pointing to my right eye. And they got it right, because it hasn't worked since then. Also, I'm not dead, so I came out ahead. Now, since we are pretty much symmetrical beings, this procedure that I require does have the potential for what we might call bilateral abuse, or a bilateral error, quack. But I have been through this tomfoolery, these shenanigans, before, a few times actually, and it is my hope that since they have not gone in the wrong direction before, they will not be deflected this time. But as I said, I am dreading it despite the reassurances I just gave you, because who likes being under general anesthesia? Who likes the painful aftermath of a surgery? And this one is, for a week or two, quite uncomfortable. The last time, which was late last year, earlier this year, it wasn't the same procedure, but a related one, I had the strangest experience when they woke me up. I didn't come to all at once, as you might out of a different kind of sleeping experience, a nap even. You were asleep, now you're here. Someone says, hey, wake up, and you, huh, what? But in this case, the world actually wound like a turntable. And what I felt as I was in the hospital, and you hear a lot of machines making noise, and the sound of fans going, and the pinging of all the devices and people talking, I actually experienced the world come to me, or I came back to it from a faraway place, and I experienced it as that sound going, and I was awake again, and everything was normal. But it was like a spooling, or an unspooling, maybe. And I've been unnerved by the idea of going back under general anesthesia again ever since. There's something about the non-being of that, which is simultaneously cool and really frightening. I'm not sure that you have much more sense of time passing when you're just sleeping, but I feel like you do. In the way that, at least for me, very often when I wake up, I have a good sense of what time it is. Whenever I've had a medical procedure that required a general anesthesia, I've always found it kind of neat when the anesthesiologist says, okay, Steve, we're going to get you going now. And I say, okay, cool, when will it? And then the next thing I know, I'm in the recovery room. But that blank spot in between, it's not the same as sleeping. Anything could have happened. Why, you were so out, they could have taken your credit card, downloaded all the pornography, and then this is the terrible part, not shared any of it with you. And so I'd like to skip it, but it has been explained to me that it would be dangerous if I did at some point. There's a time bomb aspect to this, and I would rather not have that happen. And I have put off some travel for this reason when I'm on an airplane, when I'm stuck on I-95 in Connecticut. And those of you who have attempted that particular feat know that there is no time, day or night, rush hour, 4 a.m., doesn't matter, when you will not get stuck on I-95 in Connecticut. It's so bad. How bad is it? Well, let me put it this way. If somehow Hitler is still alive, I hope that right now he's trying to drive through Connecticut on I-95. That's how bad it is. And here's the thing. There's nothing wrong with my appendix that I know of, but say that one's appendix suddenly ruptured on I-95 in Connecticut. You're not getting there. You're not making it out. It's all over for you curtains because you are stuck in bumper-to-bumper traffic in lovely downtown Stamford, Connecticut. This is the last of Earth. We will be together again in heaven, children, but for now, it's goodbye, Stamford. As John Lennon and Ringo Starr didn't quite sing, it's all down to good night, Stamford. What's frustrating to me about this, and here is the baseball of it, because baseball is everything, and everything is baseball, and certainly within our suffering there is baseball, and vice versa. This week, my good friend and former colleague on this podcast, Cliff Corcoran, welcome back anytime he feels like it, shared with me a photograph of Casey Stengel, your manager and mine, talking to his catcher, the man he called, well, his man, Yogi Berra, and neither of them were wearing pants. Now, I know I just talked about pornography, but it wasn't that kind of photo. It was discreet. They were seemingly having some kind of conference in the pre- or post-game clubhouse. At least I hope so, because if it was the 21 club, then I've misunderstood the nature of the 21 club. But they were putting their heads together, and Cliff pointed out that Casey, who might have been anywhere from 60 to 70 years old in the picture, had really well-developed calf muscles. These are things that we baseball fans talk about, apparently. And it wouldn't be the first time that I, or probably Cliff, have noticed that sort of thing. You know, there's a picture of Babe Ruth that is reproduced in at least one, maybe more, books about the Babe. And he's face down in the clubhouse on a massage table. He is very clearly nude except for a towel discreetly draped over his derriere. And what catches the eye, given the angle of the photograph, which is sort of horizontal but at an angle, is first of all, those famously tapered ankles of his that look like they shouldn't have been able to support his weight. But above them, oh, those calves. They explain a lot about how he was able to get around despite basically having ankles like the stem on a champagne glass. And I looked at the photo, the one of Casey and Yogi, I mean, not the one of the Babe. And as one of the world's acknowledged experts on the life of Charles Dillon Stengel, I said, now wait a minute, Cliff. That might not be protruding muscle. It might be protruding bone. Now, I know that some people get squeamish about that kind of description, but just give me half a second. I'm sure we've discussed this before. But as you know, as Cliff well knows, in 1943, when Casey was managing the Boston Braves, he was run over by a car. I went to the spot in Boston where it happened. You can go too, should you choose to. Just don't try to cross the street. Don't be like Casey in that sense. It's Kenmore Square, which is a very busy intersection near both Fenway Park and the former location of Braves Field, which still exists, at least part of the building. It is a football stadium on the campus of Boston University. My younger sister attended Boston University. Imagine my delight when I visited her for the first time and found myself in Kenmore Square, passing directly below the famous Citgo sign. That's roughly where Boston University is. Now, today, you don't have to cross this chaotic intersection because there's a subway station beneath it, and since there's an entrance on both sides, you can go across underground. It's been a while since I attempted this, so it might be that you have no other choice but to go underground. Fortunately for you, the car that would have had your name on it passes by safely overhead. I think that was an intentional part of the design. I know in places like London, it's a pretty common thing to keep the pedestrians out of the intersections by letting them cross beneath them. That is, they intentionally dig out pedestrian tunnels as opposed to just having them be the happy accident of a subway station placement. Now, maybe I'm ignorant, and whether you live in Detroit or Dublin, it's common where you are, but in my part of the world, much less so. It was a rainy day early in the 1943 season. It seems like the weather, and this may be true today as well, even in the era of global climate change, that Boston is still like this, but when Casey spent his 5 years managing the Braves, it seemed like opening day, when it was scheduled to be at home, was always being rained out, sometimes for days at a time. Well, this was a very rainy, very dark day. I believe that the subway pass-through at Kenmore Square already existed, but for whatever reason, he was crossing on foot, and bam, he got hit, and his right leg was broken. It got reported that he was hit by a cab driver, but as Casey often clarified, it wasn't a taxi driver that hit me, it was a Spanish fella, and he didn't have no insurance. If you recall your high school history, then you will know that 1943 was right smack in the middle of America's involvement in World War II. The hospitals were full of returning veterans. Well, returning makes it sound like they were done with their service. No, they were just wounded or ill or injured too severely to recover overseas. They were shipped home to recuperate in Boston or to get treatment there. I'm sure they went many, many other places as well. Because there was such a great competition for hospital beds in the city, Casey ended up in a maternity ward. Due to that, his leg was treated incorrectly. It never healed appropriately, and it was disfigured for the rest of his life. Billy Martin described it as looking like a sock with a ball in it. There was this, as I said at the outset of this discussion, this protrusion of bone. And Casey did require a lot of therapy in his backyard pool before he could get back to perambulating about with his old aplomb. He should have spent a year away from baseball. His wife Edna wanted him to, so he could rehabilitate his leg appropriately. But as it turned out, he went right on managing. The only difference was that he didn't do it in Boston, and he didn't do it in the majors. And I don't think that his being hit by a car and his losing his job in Boston with the Braves were unconnected. And that's the unfairness of it all, of illness and injury. And I will talk about that more right after this quick intermission. See, waking up was just like that. Whereas today, your insurance company will find any excuse to truncate your hospital stay, back in 1943, they were in no rush to get rid of a fella. Casey spent the first 6 weeks of the 1943 baseball season, approximately, in the hospital and then in recovery. In the meantime, the Boston Braves were managed by one of his coaches, a former catcher from back in the dead ball era, named Bob Coleman. Right now, you might be thinking, oh, this is one of those Wally Pipp situations, isn't it? This normally indolent Braves team got hot under Bob, and Casey lost his job. Once he was healthy, they didn't want him back because of the Coleman miracle. No, Coleman, pardon this expression, shone no lantern over the performance of the Boston Braves. They went 21-25 under him, and later 47-60 under Casey. The Braves, under owner/frontman J.A. Robert Bob Quinn, who we've talked about so many times on this show, I'm not going to reintroduce him, were bankrupt because, once again, just as when he had been owner/frontman of the Red Sox, Quinn didn't have the backing that he thought he did when he took over the club, and secondarily, they had awful luck. The biggest part of the bad luck was, well, World War II, because rebuilding clubs were especially, pardon again the expression, wounded by the manpower crisis that was introduced by the armed forces, taking away not just major league stars, but prospects, which in their case included a young Warren Spahn. They also had poor luck in the sense that they did introduce a decent number of prospects during Casey's 5 years and change there, but either they didn't develop or they got hurt or they became disenchanted with playing for such a dead-end ball club, and they were either let go or their careers just stagnated or they were traded. That said, with the exception of Spahn, they really didn't bring anyone up who was likely to have developed into a Hall of Famer. I mean, not that you can generally know that in advance. Maybe somebody said it about Junior Griffey or Bryce Harper as they were on their way up. These were just occasionally solid supporting actors looking for their Tom Cruise. I think often of a shortstop who came up in 1939. He had bounced around quite a bit, actually, by the standards of talented young players, but he was still only 22 when the Braves made him a big league regular. He had been in the Reds organization, he had been in the Yankees organization, and they decided, given other infield prospects they had around at the time, they would trade him to the Bees, which, again, is a testament, I would think, to the relationship between Yankees farm director George Weiss and Braves manager Casey Stengel, who later would partner with the Yankees. I realized I called the Braves the Bees a moment ago. This was their nom de baseball. At the time, the Bees, they were hiding from being the Braves because the Braves had been that terrible. Also, the name Braves had no organic connection to Boston baseball or Boston anything, not the Tea Party, not nothing, but rather signified a prior owner's, a long-dead owner's, connection to New York's Tammany Hall Democratic Party political machine. So, Boston's new owners were well within their rights to dump it. Yes, dump it like so much tea going into the harbor, cut it out. This shortstop's name was Eddie Miller, and he's forgotten today because he was primarily a glove man, it seemed at times, such as in 1940, when in that terrible Braves park, which was a severe pitcher's park, he hit 276, 330, 418, which was a very good showing for a shortstop of the day who was not, say, Junior Stevens. Unfortunately, that turned out to be, if not a one-off for his term in Boston, which lasted 4 seasons. And if you look at his career on the whole, he was a career 238, 290, 352 hitter, which shortstop or not just isn't very good. And looking at his minor league numbers, I'm not sure why anyone thought he had the potential to be a lot better than that, but they did think so at the time. And maybe we should defer to the wisdom of scouts who actually saw him play as a kid. Simultaneously, he did make 7 National League All-Star teams. People thought really highly of Eddie Miller as a player, primarily because he was a terrific glove. But he's a great example of what I mean by Braves prospects at that time being supporting actors in search of a star. I'll use another talented Braves shortstop prospect as a parallel example. Andrelton Simmons came up with the Atlanta Braves in 2012. Now, anyone who watched baseball over the next roughly 10 years will recall that Andrelton Simmons was a terrific defensive shortstop. He won 4 Gold Gloves. He probably should have had a bunch more. However, could you say that Andrelton Simmons, career 263, 312, 366 hitter, if an Andrelton Simmons was the best player on your team, would your team have been able to win a pennant? I think the answer is pretty clearly no, and certainly no Andrelton Simmons team, who did have other players, had some who ended up in the Hall of Fame. Chipper Jones, Freddie Freeman, who probably will eventually. None of them did. Another example of poor luck, in 1940, they brought up an outfielder, 23 years old, named Chet Ross. Chet, that year, in the Braves' tough park, it didn't bother him that much. He hit 281 with a 352 on-base percentage and slugged 460. He led the league in strikeouts with 127, which was a ton for that time. However, he also hit 23 doubles, 14 triples, 17 home runs, and he drew 59 walks. This was a very solid young left fielder. We can only speculate about what might have happened. Would the strikeouts have gotten out of hand and destroyed his batting average? Would he have been able to keep going in the same way or cut the strikeouts down and improve somewhat? No one will ever know because, and I got into this quite a bit back in episode 299, the following March of 1941, he badly twisted his left ankle, sliding into second. He tried to play through it. And then in mid-July, he slid into second base. He was trying to break up a double play, and instead, he broke his fibula. I think the same leg. He was out for the season, and he just never got better. His career was ruined. Over the remainder of his career, and he couldn't play very often, he hit 206, 273, 336, and here's the cherry on top of this particular ice cream sundae. In 1945, the military took him anyway. I don't think this is unique to the Braves, by the way, if you think of the Yankees and their baby bombers of 1990, or the Mets with their young guns. Sometimes the players who seem like important parts of your rebuild, they just never arrive. The only part that's unique to the Braves, as well as other rebuilding clubs of the period, and of course, well, all the 16 teams, was World War II. If a player doesn't develop under a given manager or coaching staff or front office, maybe that's their fault, maybe it's not. It's hard to assign blame. There have been examples, we know there have been, of, for some reason, a manager or coaches or teammates trying to undermine kids as they come up. Mel Hall, great guy, he said very sarcastically, was said to have subjected a young Bernie Williams, a borderline Hall of Famer when all was said and done, to some severe hazing when he first came to the major leagues. Cito Gaston, as Blue Jays manager, had a great reputation, but he also seems to have not liked John Olerud or Sean Green very much. And then there are injuries, and then there's the war, and then there's the fact that ownership couldn't put any money into the team. And yes, everyone associated with it looked bad. In fact, to get ahead of the story just slightly, in 1944, Bill Veeck was in the military, overseas. He was a co-owner, at that time, not of a major league team, but of the minor league Milwaukee Brewers of the American Association. His partner, and also the team's manager, was Charlie Grimm, Jolly Charlie, and he got a chance to go back to the majors with the Chicago Cubs, and he very much wanted to go. Well, that would have left the team high and dry, but he said, "No problem, I'll hire my pal Casey, who is currently at Liberty, bum leg permitting." Well, when Veeck found out, he was pissed. He wrote Grimm a letter outlining all the reasons that he was pissed that Casey was hired, and one of them was, he's been associated with the Braves, which is enough to damn anybody. And yes, Casey was available for all the reasons that I just outlined. But there's another part of it that brings me back to his injury and my injury that requires surgery and just the unfairness and randomness of things. As I said to you last week, I've had a pretty good head of steam up lately. I'm making some real progress on things that are important to me, and that includes this program. I don't want to miss time for pain. My entire life has been altered by various medical situations like this. And there was a time before my body started to quit on me, and again, I'm very grateful because I'm still here, that personally and professionally, my life had a very different trajectory. And I'm not saying that the one I'm on now is worse, but I kind of liked that one too. And unfortunately, there was so much IL time and so much fallout from that, both physical and emotional, that I really couldn't, like Chet Ross, pick up where I left off. And so I'm now here. And just like Casey, who didn't break through with the Yankees as manager until he was 60, well, I ain't 60, and I don't want to wait till I'm 60, but I'm older than a lot of other prospects too, and I still look upon myself as one. I think I will always look upon myself as one because, first, I hope it's true, age or not, and secondly, the thing I fear most is complacency. Well, complacency and death. Fascism, death, complacency, probably in that order. And maybe also running into this woman who I went to high school with and who I actually did nearly run into at the grocery store the other day, but I ducked up the cookies aisle. Gee, I'm not proud of that, but she's so loud. Also, if I hadn't done that, I wouldn't have noticed some cookies that I turned out to like. I realized that I'm no different than Aaron Judge is this season. Aaron has a fractured rib somehow and is going to miss quite a bit of time, which is a loss to all of us who enjoy baseball, because whether you're a Yankees fan or not, he is one of the peak practitioners of the art of the game. But think about the ways that time is not fungible for him. He's 34. He's not ever going to be 34 again. And there's no way of knowing whenever he gets back to this. And as we progress, I hope, into next year and the year after and so on, that 35 or 36 and so on will be as kind to him as his early 30s were. Look at Chet Ross, who I mentioned earlier, our young Brave. 24 wasn't as kind to him as 23 was, and basically nothing after that was kind to him, at least in a baseball sense. And you'd think, well, a momentary pause for injury, for pain, for recovery doesn't have the same impact on a baseball manager or for that matter, a podcaster and writer, because their horizons are a little bit more broad and they don't have the tick, tick, tick of the clock on their athletic skills, maybe on their other skills, but not in the same way, not on the same schedule with the same rapidity and aggressiveness. And yet, timing is everything. And in terms of Casey's stint with Boston, the timing of his broken leg was really severe because at that time, there were three men, all construction magnates, looking to buy into the team, in fact, buy out Quinn. And in early 1944, they did so. They were Lou Perini, Joe Maney, and Guido Rugo, and they were called the Three Steam Shovels. And they were very eager to rebuild the club, and in fact, ultimately, these were the same people, Perini in particular, who would move the team to Milwaukee. So these guys are getting familiar with their new toy, except the manager, who has a certain amount of built-in ill will, in a sense, just because, as Bill Veeck pointed out, he has been associated with 5 losing years with this team. They want to see him in action. They want to talk to him. They want to get to know him, to pick his brain, but he's not around. He's in the hospital. I'm sure they sent flowers. Maybe they visited, but he wasn't there. Bob Coleman was, and they got comfortable with him. They got used to seeing him and developed a rapport. So at the end of the season, they asked Casey to resign, and they put Bob back in charge for 1945. Again, this wasn't altogether fair. I note that in 1945, early 1945, after the Three Steam Shovels had taken over, they had kept Bob Quinn on for a while as team president, and he announced in February 1945 that the new owners are eager that we build the organization into a lasting National League power. It is my opinion that this is not possible without a minor league farm system, so we are going to build one. Now, this was 1945. Branch Rickey had been in the farm system business for something like 20 years, but Bob Quinn and the prior owner, Judge Fuchs, hadn't had the money to build a farm system. It's just that now Bob Quinn had a bankroll behind him. He also noted that eventually he would retire. He went on to become president of the Hall of Fame. That was sort of his emeritus position after leaving the Braves. He told one of those three owners that one of them might as well enjoy the title of president, well, at some point, because they might not get much of anything else for their money. That, much more than managerial fecklessness, had been the story of the Braves. And possibly, Casey could have made that argument if, again, he hadn't been in bed. And so, through a combination of factors, including, in no particular order, Bob Quinn's fecklessness, Hitler and Tojo, Bill Veeck being overseas, again, due to the fascists, Phil Wrigley wanting to bring Jolly Charlie Grimm back to the majors, the Three Steam Shovels buying a baseball team, not being able to find the manager because he was in traction, Bob Coleman apparently being an easier guy to talk to, Kenmore Square in Boston being a civil design nightmare, and the weather in the spring in Boston being so inconsiderate, and finally, one reckless, not a cab driver, Spaniard without insurance who ran over a future Hall of Fame manager before he could figure out how to get out of the way. You could look it up, as Casey would have said. My point being that our lives can be disrupted not only by incredibly serious things, monumental things like world wars, but they can be nearly destroyed or at least severely disrupted by the most trivial of things. And that, my friends, is why I'm shaking my fist at the fates right now for inconveniencing me in this way. I imagine you didn't need me to tell you that. You've always been a smart crowd, and no doubt you figured that out back when we started 30 minutes ago. We have come to the end of another episode. I appreciate your patience with another show that is a departure from our normal format and is shorter and improvisational. I beg your indulgence while I get through this procedure and the recovery, and then I will be back to you with more episodes in the traditional infinite inning format. For now, since this is a shorter episode, I will once again leave you with a shorter goodbye and simply say that all things being equal, I will be back next week with more tales from inside the infinite inning.